We are here next to one of the most iconic aircraft in military history, one of the most iconic fighter aircraft of the 20th century. This is the famous Fokker triplane, or Fokker Dreidecker. Dreidecker in German means three wings, so it's the Fokker triplane or Fokker Dreidecker. One simply Fokker Dreidecker. One. A lot of people have already guessed, a lot of people already know which plane this is. This is the famous aircraft, the most famous mount of Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. So the Red Baron flew this aircraft here during his last phase of combat in World War I. He is the record holder for kills in World War I between 1914 and 1918. Manfred von Richthofen achieved a total of 80 kills. During those years, he flew several aircraft, including planes like that one over there, the Fokker D3, and we also have this replica here. And during Richthofen's last months of combat, when he had already been promoted, Richthofen became the first German pilot to command a fighter wing. He commanded the Jagdgeschwader 1, or First Fighter Wing, which was a pioneering organization that brought together several fighter squadrons under its umbrella. The Jastas, spelled Jasta, Jasta is a contraction of Jagdstaffel, which literally means fighter squadron. So several fighter squadrons were united under the command of a single wing, for the first time under the command of the Red Baron, who already had more than 50 kills at that time, right? The story of this plane here is quite curious because the Fokker Dreidecker, the Fokker triplane, its inspiration comes from an English plane, the Sopwith triplane, which entered combat on the Western Front in February 1917. The Sopwith triplane, it really made an impact on the front line, right? And the first models that were shot down worried the German authorities. One of these models, in fact, was captured almost intact when a British pilot made a forced landing near the German lines. And then Jasta 11 captured this Sopwith triplane and took it to their quarters, right? In those quarters, then, this triplane, it was visited by an engineer named Anthony Fokker, the guy who made all those planes for the Luftstreitkräfte, right? Which was the Army Air Force, the air service of the German Army. So once Anthony Fokker saw the first Sopwith triplane, he ordered his chief engineer at Fokker to design a triplane aircraft without giving any further details about the Sopwith. For this engineer then, by the month of May 1917, right, this engineer then presented the plans. And the first prototype, which was called, if I remember correctly, the V4, right? The first prototype, which was actually shorter, had shorter wings, 3 separate wings, right? But they were shorter and it was quite unstable, right? So Anthony Fokker ordered a complete revision of the project, which resulted in this look that you see here, with the wings a bit longer, right? Including these structures, right? These spars, all this wing support structure was much more reinforced, doubled here, and the controls became much smoother. With the enlargement of the rudder there, right, the airplane's tail and also the elevator, the aircraft controls became much more precise. Why 3 wings, right? Why 3 separate sets of wings? At that time, airplanes were machines powered by engines that were still not very powerful compared to what we saw decades later, right? So these engines combined with this structure, which were radial engines, right? Let's look at the radial engine, these radial engines, combined with this structure, right, really flat here in the front, round and flat, caused a lot of drag. And of course, a fixed landing gear will also cause a lot of drag. Therefore, a low top speed, if all the planes have a low top speed, maneuverability can be a decisive factor for success in combat. And can you imagine what 3 different wings with 3 sets of lift can do for an aircraft like this? They will give it much greater maneuverability, a much tighter turning radius compared to enemy planes, right? And do you know who was the first pilot to fly the Fokker Dreidecker? One which wasn't even called Dreidecker, one at the time? This was in the summer of 1917. So, who was the first pilot to fly it? The second prototype of this plane here, which was called 102/17, was Manfred von Richthofen. And with the second prototype of this plane here, Richthofen, he shot down 2 enemy aircraft. I can't remember now if they were English or French aircraft, but 2 enemy aircraft were shot down. With the second prototype of the Fokker Dreidecker, the third prototype was also flown by Werner Voss, another great ace who also achieved success with this plane. And then quickly, the Fighter Aviation Inspectorate, right? They ordered the production of about 120 units of this model here, right? So 120 units started coming off the Fokker production lines there around September or October of 1917. This plane was equipped with 2 Maschinengewehr, 8 machine guns, Maschinengewehr, 8 Spandau. So these 2 machine guns fired in a synchronized way through the propeller, right? The synchronizer, as I've explained in other videos here, was a kind of device that had a switch, right? It rotated together with the propeller shaft and had a switch for the moment when the propeller passed in front of one of the 2 machine guns. So this switch would momentarily silence the gun, making sure the bullets didn't directly hit the blades, right? A major criticism of this plane was the fact that the gun breeches were very close to the pilot's face. And in accidents, where the plane would crash nose first into the ground for some reason, right after landing, the plane could tip forward onto its nose. The guns could then come back and hit the pilot directly in the face, causing some accidents. And sometimes fatal, actually. That was one of the main criticisms of this plane here. The first batch, in fact, had very fragile wings, and 2 pilots died. In fact, I believe that Werner Voss himself died at the controls of one of these Dreidecker 1S because of failures in the triplane's wings, right? I said biplane a few times here, but they're triplanes. So I believe that Werner Voss, in fact, died. The accident was with the upper wing, right? Which, in fact, was subjected to a greater load than the other 2. The load on the upper wing was higher than on the other 2. Anthony Fokker himself, he admitted that it was a quality error. It was a problem with the factory's quality control. And he himself, out of his own pocket, right from his own expenses, with his own money, he reformatted the entire production line to increase the quality of the units that were delivered. Right, anyway, to the front line. And then one last increase in the order, adding 200 more units, right, for a total of 320 units. So it was carried out at the end of 1917, so that in 1918, about 11 fighter squadrons were fully occupied. They were fully equipped with a Fokker Dreidecker. One, right? And then, in April 1918, the most famous event happened that marks, the Dreidecker, one's performance on the front line, which is precisely the last battle of Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. He has that name precisely because he painted his aircraft entirely red. He was the only German pilot who did that exactly to attract the attention of the enemies for him in the air, And then he went to defend Wolfram von Richthofen, his cousin who had just become a fighter pilot, from a Canadian pilot named Wilfrid May. So he was defended in turn by another pilot named Roy Brown, who dove after Richthofen on April 20th around 11 in the morning. And Richthofen, so he flew a very flat flight close to the ground where an Australian force was guarding the front line. Australian soldiers then, in particular a soldier named Cedric Popkin, fired upwards to be able to hit Richthofen's plane. And Cedric Popkin then fatally hit Richthofen from below, even causing damage to his heart, and Richthofen managed to make a forced landing and died in the cockpit of his plane on April 20, 1918. The Fokker Dreidecker 1 was replaced by another fighter plane, the Fokker D-7, in the last months of the conflict, precisely in the summer of 1918. And in the end, the production numbers of this plane here only reached 320 units. Only 2 units survived World War I in German museums, and these 2 units, interestingly, were destroyed during the World War II. Therefore, all the Fokker Dreidecker 1S we have today are replicas. Like this one here, they're replicas, including flying replicas. Many World War aviation clubs today fly the Dreidecker. 1. We have a lot of flight information. At air shows in England, you see several Dreidecker 1S flying together. It's really a fantastic sight, but unfortunately, they're all replicas. Very few Dreidecker 1 parts are preserved in museums today. Some parts, including the tail assembly of Richthofen's Fokker, are preserved there. In the Museum of Aeronautics in Paris, the Le Bourget Museum, we've already seen it there, so it's a testimony to the history that we're seeing here. This airplane is super iconic. It captured the imagination of so many people. In fact, there's the iconic representation of the Dreidecker, one in the Snoopy cartoon, where Snoopy dreams of fighting the Red Baron. And today we have a really cool replica here in Brazil, here at Hangar 33 in Blumenau, which, by the way, you should check out their social media. With several other planes here, look over there, 2 Antonov 2S, and there's a replica of the Albatros D3. Right there, we have a T6, a North American T6, actually belonging to Colonel Braga, in the colors of the old Esquadrilha da Fumaça. So, there are a lot of really interesting planes here at Hangar 33. If you enjoyed this video, share it, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe to Sala de Guerra so you don't miss anything. I'll wrap it up here. Thanks again for watching, and here's a big hug from Sala de Guerra.